Hi, I'm Victor Purton from the Centre for Optimism, and it's a welcome to Kate Gould. Kate is just doing some fantastic work in both research and treatment and care of people with brain injury, but that's not all she does. And we're really looking forward to this conversation and asking her a few questions about what she does. So Kate Gould, it's a rule when you come to the Centre for Optimism that you answer the question, what makes you optimistic? Kate Gould, what makes you optimistic?
Thank you, Victor. So thrilling and a privilege to be talking with you today to have a conversation about optimism. I think it's a short question, but I think it has quite a complex answer, as we've talked about. You know, you can write 3 pages on why you think you're an optimist. And as you said, I'm a neuropsychologist and I'm interested in the brain, psychology, behaviour. And so the way I see the question is as a neuropsychologist and what's the formulation? What is the reason? Why am I the way I am? So I'm going to answer it like a neuropsychologist as well. And one of the key kind of ways we look at the world is with a lens of this biopsychosocial framework. So that's combining biological, psychological, and social reasons. So I think there's parts of all of that as to why I'm an optimist, and I'll explore a little bit about each of those. At the foundation, I think I really have to acknowledge I've had a lot of privileges in terms of my upbringing in a good family, good education, and I haven't had significant hardship in my life from a social perspective, but biologically as well. I've had the fortune of good health, and I think I've inherited a half-decent brain that gives me a good head start, excuse the pun. And I think these have enabled me to know, for example, what I want for my life, and then have given me the resources and the motivation, and my brain has given me that ability to work hard to achieve my ambitions, which I'm progressing in. And so then in terms of the actual work I do, I work in the community in rehabilitation, and I think that line of work really has to attract an optimist, but then also hone this value. I work with adults who have had severe brain injuries through car accidents, workplace injuries, falls, strokes. And my job is to help them understand how the injuries affected them, to work with them in their home, in their community, and to build a meaningful life and a positive life. So optimism is absolutely essential in this. Otherwise, if you don't have any hope that things will improve, why even start? And so I really believe in relentless optimism, that there's always something that works. And it's our job to figure that out together. What is it that's going to work? And let's try some things out. And thirdly, I think my optimism is also a choice that I make, not only in the way of thinking and feeling about myself, others, and the world, but also in how I behave each day in trying to instill hope in the example I set through things like just trying out new things, taking chances, and investing in myself and in the future, to try to see the best in people, not in a naive way, because there are bad actors out there who take advantage. But I think most people are good, generous, want to be helpful, and that we can all connect through that value of optimism, as we're all here doing today. And I think that that's an essential way to really unlock a better world. And finally, I'm often really inspired by the tenacity, the resilience, and the perseverance of the people that I get the privilege to work with, who have gone through significant injuries and trauma and are steadfastly rebuilding their lives on the other side. And so I think that's my short, long answer of what makes me optimistic.
Kate, I'm a bit like you. People, we've got wonderful quotable quotes on the Centre for Optimism's website. One sentence, and people say, "What makes you optimistic, Victor?" I say it's 3 pages, lots of ancestors. And recently we had the Nelson Mandela Youth Leadership Summit, Kate, at the Parliament. And the quote we gave the children was this from Nelson Mandela: "I am fundamentally an optimist. Whether that comes from nature or nurture, I cannot say. Part of being optimistic is keeping one's head pointed towards the sun, one's feet moving forward. There were many dark moments when my faith in humanity was sorely tested. And we first met at your grandmother's book launch, Dita Gould's The Girl in the Lion's Mouth. So, and there's a question already online from one of our friends, can you learn to be an optimist? So is your optimism nature or nurture?
I think that's, a classic, great question. And I think the place we come to is it's always a combination of both. I started with my nature, those building blocks that helped me get started in a way that would look at the world in an optimistic way. And then I think my experiences through, family life, through my training, my work, they all facilitate that. My grandmother, Dita Gould, is, we're talking about her book. She wrote a book in her late 80s and published it during the pandemic. And, it's very inspiring to see that and to grow up with that kind of influence. As a real go-getter, she says, where there's a will, there's a way. And that is optimistic, but it's also not complacent. It's also about working hard to get what you want because you believe that it's possible.
Kate, you're a clinical neuropsychologist. It's a wonderful title, practicing community brain injury rehabilitation. So not everyone goes into this field. We don't know that many neuropsychologists. So how did you get started and what does your work involve?
Yeah, it's a great opportunity to be able to really, I guess, promote and provide some information to the community about what neuropsychology is about, so that if there is ever a need, that there is a profession that's designed to help. So neuropsychologists, we're a type of psychologist who is particularly interested in the relationship with the brain on a structural and functional level, and the association between the brain and behaviour, emotions, functioning. So whereas you might be familiar with psychologists that provide help around anxiety, depression, substance use, or maybe work in school settings as education psychologists or sports psychologists that help with performance. There's a whole range of different types of psychologists. And neuropsychologists tend to be interested in people who have neurological conditions, working out from a diagnostic perspective, do they have some sort of neurological issue like a brain injury or dementia in the elderly or childhood disorders, epilepsy, and how does that affect their brain functioning in terms of their thinking, their cognition, memory, attention, speed of thinking, judgment, reasoning, problem solving, planning, their emotions as well in the context of their brain function, and behaviour as well. Are they acting and responding to the world and themselves in the way they used to? So we kind of look at all of that from an assessment perspective. A lot of neuropsychologists are focused on assessment, and that would be doing structured, standardized tests of thinking. So it kind of is a bit like an IQ test, but more expansive, more detailed, and unpacking not just intelligence, but different facets of cognition. Whereas I'm in rehab, so I'm more interested in, so what now? You've got, an injury or a neurological disability or change. How do we help you live your best life?
Your revolutionary work, the thing that really, attracts me is your PBS+. I love that expression. Relentless optimism is at the core of PBS+. Working flexibly, systematically, and creatively together with the person with the injury, their family and team. There is always something that works. So do you want to tell us about this revolutionary field and in particular how you're growing it out now with handbooks and, helping the world deal with brain injury with optimism?
Oh, yeah, well, thank you for those kind words. So one of the areas that in the situation of traumatic and acquired brain injuries, so people who've had car accidents or maybe a stroke, they can often be still as intelligent as they were, but perhaps have a range of difficulties depending on each person's different. Everyone starts off differently. They have a different brain to start with, and they have different injuries. So some people have quite mild injuries and some people have more severe injuries. And particularly people with more moderate to severe brain injuries, it's quite common to have behaviour change. So we found 70% of people in the first 2 years have behaviour change. And that's things like verbal aggression, being more angry verbally, swearing, yelling, threats, and things like that. It can also be changes in their social interactions, and also a behaviour change might be finding it harder to get up and go and get started. So these behaviours can all have a really big impact on the person. They can be upsetting, particularly if they're quite aware of them. They can be hard for families. And often clinicians, neuropsychs and other providers who might work with them, often a bit stumped to know what to do. There hasn't been a huge amount of research evidence specifically for this population of adults with brain injury and behaviour change. So at Monash University, and led by Jenny Ponsford and Tim Feeney and myself, we have conducted a randomised controlled trial to look at a positive behaviour support approach. And that's an approach that looks at understanding the behaviours, but more importantly, understanding what the person wants for their life and how to rebuild a really positive life, and how those behaviours getting in the way of that. And so this work has been done by Tim Feeney and Mark Ilvasacker for many, many years, but it hadn't been subjected to this level of a clinical trial. So we did that and we finished it only a few years ago. And we did find that our approach, PBS+, a positive behaviour support approach to challenging behaviours, did improve the people's behaviour, but also help them achieve what they wanted for their life. And so my job now is to help translate that into the community. Just because it's been done in research doesn't mean that people are using it. So that's what I'm really excited to sort of speak to people about, and in particular, how we use optimism at the core of what we're doing. So that hope and that optimism is one of the most critical parts of the way that we work. Tim says that optimism is a shield against despair and an invitation to great possibilities. So as optimists, we are positive and hopeful, as well as being responsive to the realities of the people confront, and that as providers and clinicians, we owe it to the people that we serve to be relentlessly optimistic, and that there's always something that works.
So we've got, actually, just before we call on the questions from the audience, you've given me some examples in the past that have intrigued me. You know, just little lifestyle changes. You know, you ask someone what they want rather than you're telling them what they can do. If you want to, just before I call on some of the other questions, do you want to give us a couple of the examples of what you do with the people that you're helping?
Yeah, so, you know, we have this attitude of relentless optimism and being, you know, open-minded about possibility, and that kind of orientation to the way that we work, in a very humanist approach. But then the optimism also comes through with the actions and the practicalities of the way we work. So that starting question of, you know, what do you want for your life? And you can be completely aspirational, and you don't have to be realistic. It doesn't have to be that we start the conversation at a 6-month goal that the funder will support. But we have this sort of, you know, big kind of blue sky thinking to just open that possibility. And for some people, they've never really had that kind of conversation, and it can be pretty tricky. And so we can provide support around that and how to think about yourself in a more optimistic way for your future. And then also, as we're doing work, it's also about not looking at progress and how things have gone in a sort of success and failure way, but we move to a kind of approach of, well, what did we learn? Then we'll just adjust. And so whatever's happening, we're looking at that optimistically. We still have a kind of clear-eyed evaluation of the outcome. We don't just say, oh, everything's great, it's fine. But, you know, maybe that didn't go the way we wanted. It's not a tragedy, that's fine. Let's recognize that and think about that and review that, because we don't expect to get things right the first time, but it's a process of learning and improvement. We're experimenters, and we're always looking towards that possibility and creating a momentum from that. And I think inevitably something good will happen, and that's that relentless optimism. There's always something that works. And we keep going through this process, and it might not always be us driving it, but we support the person and their family to keep going with this process of continual improvement. And I think that, you know, our research sort of shows that that is an effective way to work with people. And even though we're working towards these aspirations, and I think the example you're talking about, Victor, is, you know, when people can say whatever they want, essentially, about what they want for their life, that's each person's prerogative. And we had somebody said that I want to win Tats Lotto. That's what I want for my life. And we're like, great, that's a wonderful dream to have. And then let's sort of think about that realistically. How are we going to get there to give you the best chance to win Tats Lotto? So a big part of that will be buying a ticket. And for this person, there were a lot of steps before they could buy a ticket. They had to get back to using their wheelchair. They had to learn the route to get from their home to the newsagent. They had to save up some money to buy that ticket regularly. And so that formed a really sort of effective and important and meaningful program for him to work towards winning Tats Lotto. And it's not necessarily even about winning the Tats Lotto that we could, you know, it's an unlikely event, but it's that optimism. Let's buy the ticket and see what happens.
That's lovely, because it's so normal. Yeah, we all go and buy a Tats Lotto ticket. We dream of winning. So it's I just love that. And I always love that there's a joke, of course, that someone's praying to God and saying, I want to win Tats Lotto, and this voice comes from above. First, buy a ticket.
Yeah, exactly. Or my grandfather's experience, where he excitedly told my grandmother that he had won Tats Lotto. And she's like, that's brilliant, but I don't remember you buying a ticket. Oh, and it was a scam. So it is important to buy that ticket. Yes.
Now, Wayne Larkin sent in a question, and he asks, what type of brain injuries respond best to your optimistic treatment, your treatment with Relentless Optimism?
So in our study, we had people with a variety of brain injuries, mostly traumatic brain injuries, but also stroke, and some people with brain tumor that was not degenerative, so they were stable. And I mean, I think it's not specific to a type of brain injury. And I think, Victor, you know, in your work, optimism isn't confined to one section of society or one diagnosis. I think it's an attitude and approach for everyone. In terms of how people respond best, I think, again, you know, each person is different, whether they have the same brain injury or not, or no brain injury at all. So I think, you know, some people are more naturally optimistic and some people aren't. And for some people that can be cultivated, and for others they won't. But I think, you know, you won't know until you try. And so that's what we're about. We're trying things out. And you know, if there's some hope that things can be better and you're willing to try some things towards that, then you're on the right path.
So can I introduce you to Bobby Redmond? Bobby Redmond is a retired psychologist and an ambassador for Dementia Australia. And we've done several events with Dementia Australia, and optimism is a key to dementia. So Bobby, you've got a question on rehabilitation for people living with dementia.
Hi, Kate. I'm very excited about what you're saying. I was a clin psych and I actually worked in the disability field. And so much of the work I was doing was similar to your own in the positive behavioural intervention and giving people hope and looking forward. I was diagnosed with dementia in 2016. And I believe that my level of optimism and my strategies to keep myself moving is keeping me functioning well. So my question to you is, what is your perspective in relation to rehabilitation or reablement for people living with dementia? You said you've talked about non-degenerative type disorders, but I'm interested particularly for those of us at early to mid-stage dementia.
Yeah, great question. And I have to acknowledge that it's not the area I work in predominantly, but I know that there's a really huge shift over, the recent decades and even more recent years of looking at people and conditions that are degenerative, or where people decline and get worse over time, versus a brain injury, which can be a more static event. That it's a much more strength-based focus in the way people work now, and that there's great possibility and still great capacity for learning and adjustment, and you're a great sort of testament and example to that. You've got you're a few years into a diagnosis, you're still able to do so many things, like be part of a webinar and ask questions at a panel, which many other people wouldn't have the confidence to do. So I think I'm really excited to keep watching the field and how it continues to look at opportunity rather than impairment.
Thank you.
Now, Michael Denton, you've got a question about, you work with people in the community who have an acquired brain injury. Do you want to ask your question, Michael?
Yeah, I'm in New Zealand, hence the pillow, I think. It's a little bit later here. Yeah, I've worked in with TBI for maybe 25 years, I guess. And I just wondered about helping people who have great self-awareness, but they're kind of struggling. They're obviously acutely aware of deficits, and just how to encourage people, particularly those people who have that self-awareness and maybe quite prone to depression, and have suicidal thoughts and all that. And it's just a common thing that comes up.
Yeah, it is, Michael. I think a really important question. That my research background was looking at psychiatric disorders after brain injury, and finding that there were significantly higher rates of depression and anxiety in those first few years. In even the first 12 months, it was high as 60% of people having psychiatric problems. So it's a really significant issue. And in the sample of 100 plus people we reviewed, those were people that were getting the full spectrum of rehab. So even with services, there can be really high rates of depression and anxiety. And I don't think we have, the magic answer to that. For some people, they require medication. For the people that I support, we often work with, strategies and trying to help people cope. Acceptance and commitment therapy has been, I think, a really valuable approach for helping with mood after brain injury. And there's more and more studies coming out to support that. I think it's also about finding purpose and meaning in somebody's life, and that needs to be often redefined. If they're not able to do some of the things that they were before their injury, then it's about finding a reason to get up in the morning that is individual for them, and actually gives them a good level of engagement with their life and the world. The other thing to kind of flag, and it's not something we know how to actually really, facilitate yet, but one thing that I noticed in my research with interviews with people about depression, anxiety, and other psychiatric problems is that, yes, there were many people who experienced those difficulties, but then there were also a group of people that didn't. And I was really interested in that group of people who used, I guess, the trauma that they went through as a bit of an opportunity to step back from their life and reevaluate what was important to them, and recalibrate how they were spending their time. And I think we got a bit of a sense of that through COVID, when we were all forced to slow down. Not all of us, but many of us slowed down and think about our lives, and people made a lot of changes. And so I explored that in a more detail, and it's called post-traumatic growth. And I think that's something that we can flag for people, and maybe they do have insight to kind of help them understand that that's a possibility, and that the research on post-traumatic growth actually says that to be able to go through that, that coming out the other side better than you were before the injury, you actually have to go through a period of depression, of really coming face to face with kind of how crappy life is, to be able to really look at life, you know, in all its sort of warts and all, and reevaluate and recalibrate to be able to kind of process that really deeply. So I guess that's a bit of a potential silver lining for the difficulties people face, that some people, and in some of the work I've seen, a significant proportion, 20-30% of people can come out the other side better than they were in terms of how they view their life or how they value the way that they spend their time. So perhaps they were a workaholic before, and now they can appreciate they've got more time for family or hobbies, things like that.
That's a wonderful question, Mark. I'm glad you could join us from New Zealand. Katie, in fact, the Centre for Optimism did a study through COVID called The Better Normal. And the overwhelming number of people could find better ways of living having come through COVID. And in fact, there have even been a few books now about this notion of the better normal coming out of the trauma of COVID. And, you know, I mean, my ancestors were all refugees. I mean, we ended up in Australia. We scored the lottery. Nikki Simos, you had a great question about aneurysm and how PBA can help. Would you like to ask your question?
So thank you, Kate, for your elaborate information. I wanted to ask about aneurysms, and I have a friend who is 46 years of age, a female, married couple. Unfortunately, the female had recently suffered an aneurysm, and of course the complexity of what that involves in a relationship with change of behaviour and attitudes and challenges within their relationship. So I wonder, with your PBA approach, with the community approach that you're hoping to lead and have looking at doing further, what sort of mechanisms or protocols or framework are you hoping to support people in that space?
Great question. Thank you, Nikki. And I'm sorry, to hear about your friend. So now that we've done the trial, we've published papers explaining the research and the approach. And we've got, I guess, a few different ways to try to implement this and translate this in the community. We did a bunch of research looking at clinicians and people with injury and families, looking at what their sort of needs were. And we heard that there was a great desire for support around this topic. Clinicians told us that they were really at the moment just sort of struggling and muddling along with figuring out how to do this work. But they were also quite time poor, and they didn't necessarily have a lot of funds to contribute to this. So working in the space of challenging behaviour is really complex, and there's not a kind of quick fix to it. We can kind of talk about it quite simply. We're helping people understand and work towards their meaningful desired outcomes, and along the way helping them self-regulate behaviour. But the work is actually pretty hard and complex, and so we've just had some funding from the South Australian Accident Compensation Scheme, Lifetime Support Authority. We're actually trialling for the next 3 years an approach to train their clinicians in how to do this work through workshops and then more intensive training over 6 months. So we have a 6-month training program. It's not publicly available yet. We've also got a series of podcast episodes as a cost-effective, time-efficient way. That was another suggestion from our community clinicians. And so we've been recording interviews with people with brain injury from our trial, their family members and their clinicians, to say in their own words what this work has meant and how to do it. We've also developing a guidebook that will be for clinicians and also family members and teams that use lots of real life cases and sort of really easy to access information. And again, these will all be launched later this year. The idea is to really build a community of practice, because it can be quite complex and isolating to work in this space. And it's really a matter of us all supporting each other. And I think a big part of what the way I've been working is saying that, you know, we're all in this together, the people, the clinicians, the researchers, the people with injuries, the family members. So we should be developing these resources together, and that's what we've been doing. And along the way, because I'm a researcher, evaluating this way of working, and so far we've found that it's been extraordinarily beneficial, not just in terms of the resources we create, but that process of all coming together, putting our heads together and crafting these resources can be really meaningfully beneficial for the people taking part as well. So we're very lucky we've had people with brain injury from our trial and family members and clinicians all contributing to podcasts and our resources. And then the final part is that I've established a community clinic from Monash University where we can train clinicians, so neuropsychologists and speech therapy students so far from Melbourne and from New York as well, from the College of St. Rose, and as well as registrars and a few clinicians to see how we can best support the next generation of providers, so that it's not just a select few of us doing this work. So we're doing that and evaluating all of those things as well, and that'll keep me busy for a little while.
Well, as you know, Kate, we had a whole lot of folks in America who said they weren't going to join us at 2 a.m, but they're really looking forward to this recording and collaborating. So we have, in fact, we've answered quite a few questions already via email from the American audience. Now, Eva Siffers, you've been an utterly enthusiastic correspondent, and I think you've got a few questions for Kate. Would you like to speak?
Yeah, all right. I'm on the other side, Kate. I'm a peer. I'm somebody who now has lived half my life without disability and half my life with disability. I was 23 when I was hit by a car on a Nepean highway, and I sustained a severe brain injury. Before this time, I was an international performer, working around Australia as a dancer and in Japan and in cabaret shows. And obviously, when I sustained my head injury, there was no clear pathway for me to head. And so my insurance basically left me, dropped me like a boulder from a cliff, right? And I had a severe brain injury. I was a 4 on the Glasgow coma scale, 3 weeks in a coma. Yeah, it was big, and 2.5 months in PTA. Right, so I found that the most valuable gift that I gave myself was learning the attitude of gratitude. And I found that through gratitude, it finally hit me in about 2007. That's when gratitude came in. And ever since then, my life has changed shape, and now it's just progression and all the way forward. Now, I did say I was a professional artist before my injury, and now I'm a professional artist after my injury, but I'm also an arts worker. I am, so from an artist, I went to disability arts, and I've built my 18-year career in disability arts. Then I became a trainer, and then I became a business owner. And I've built By Accident, which is Australia's first and only peer-initiated, developed and led training for other people with brain injury. And through my trainings, I recognise everybody around the table as an authority of their own experience. And we share strategies and tools that we have found as the true authorities of people living with a brain injury. We're the ones that know it the best. And so through my workshops, we glean messages from each other, and it's so helpful. And I finally spoke at the Brain Injury Australia conference this year. So finally I have a little bit of national awareness. I launched it in 2016, and I've been running from there. I've been going from there, but I'm speaking too much. But my question was, do you want to collaborate?
Great question, Eva. And you know, we have connected, last month in Sydney at the Brain Injury Australia conference, and even a few years before that. And I've just always admired your work and the By Accident movement that you've created. And yeah, I can't agree with you more. The people with the living experience are the experts, and we've kind of changed even the terminology we use, that's often described as people with lived experience. First of all, it's living because it isn't in the past, and it's not just experience, it's expertise. So you're a living expert on brain injury, and yeah, absolutely. I think would be fantastic.
And I just want to commend you on this work. I don't know it in any way, shape, or form. I would love to find out more about it, but I want to commend you on this, because this is the way that rehab has to go. We need to step away from the deficit model and actually see brain injury as what it is. And what it is it's a complete reboot of who you thought you were. And from that point, you have the absolute blessing to create your life the way you want to live it. I'm so goddamn grateful for my brain injury. It was one of the best things that happened to me.
Oh, wow. You're an absolute inspiration, Eva. And what a fantastic attitude and example you set for seeing your life and your injury with gratitude, and taking away such incredible positivity from the opportunity to redefine your life. That's post-traumatic growth right there.
Yes, I'm putting my website into the chat so others can check it out if they want to.
And Eva, the Centre for Optimism is very happy to collaborate with you too. As Bobby would say, we did some really great sessions with Dementia Australia, and of course, so many of the people who joined us have joined us to help instill optimism in others. So you sound like a relentless optimist too.
Big time.
And Setchley, you've got a question around drug-induced brain injury.
Yes, my question, just before I ask my question, let me say, Kate, that I know your grandmother, and I go walking with her 4 mornings a week, and her optimism is extraordinary, and we all love her for it.
That's beautiful.
We also think that she's a terrific model for physical fitness, mental fitness, and well, you know what she's like.
Yeah, absolutely. She's a wonder.
She is a wonder, yeah. Yes, I know some people who have stopped taking drugs and have got, it has affected their thinking. And because they started off taking the drugs to escape from depression and despair, I'm wondering how optimism and proper rehab, which I don't think they mostly get, can help them.
Well, I guess I can go back to Tim's quote that optimism is a shield against despair. And, if people haven't been, engaged with that idea of optimism, and they have had a really tough life and they have self-medicated with drugs and alcohol, it can be a really tough journey to get to the other side of that. In our trial, we did have several individuals who had a brain injury and had drug issues as well. And it can be a really rocky road to finding a pathway out of that. But we worked with the people with drug issues in the same way we worked with everyone else with that optimism. That sometimes meant engaging specific services for drug and alcohol, and sometimes that was really tough, that people were struggling to stay engaged with, and the people around them, even the services, could struggle to stay hopeful and optimistic about their likelihood and their prognosis of sticking it out. And so that was sometimes the work we were doing, not just with the person with the drug issues, but with the services as well, and helping them to see, each time the person went in and out of rehab, that as not as a failure, but as a step along that journey, that we're learning each time, why did they disengage? What could we do differently next time? And that's sort of the optimism that others had to kind of carry for them. That's okay. You stayed, a couple of weeks, and the door is open for the next time. And the more that the services actually shifted their approach, the better outcomes there were for the person with the drug issues. And so I was lucky enough to work with one young man who he had his injury when he was 14 or 15, a bike accident, and I was seeing him now in his early 20s. And he was really frustrated by still, I guess, being treated like a child when he's in his 20s. And, you know, that his mum was amazing and helped so much, but maybe almost too much. And he felt quite dependent on her and was like anyone going through that age and development, we just wanted to break free. And so part of that was using drugs and alcohol for him. And you could see it in his body and his presentation, and the way he looked. He was grey and skinny and scrawny and unhappy and sort of stuck in this cycle. And for him, when we asked him what his dreams were, he said that he wanted to live a van life. He wanted to drive up the coast in a van and just explore on his own and break free and be independent. And his mum was obviously kind of beside herself with worry about him being able to do that. And so for us, it was, you know, supporting mum to move from doom and gloom to some optimism. Like, what's the worst that could happen? Let's give this a try. He's going to learn some things. And so we did. He did end up getting a van and driving up the coast to Queensland. And it was really interesting. Along the way, he visited some friends, and some of them were drug users as well. And from this perspective of this journey of driving up the coast in a van, he was able to sort of look at his friends who were drug users and sort of stuck on the couch just using, and sort of looked at them with new eyes of, oh gosh, like, I'm out here exploring, driving around, seeing the sights, and they're just stuck. And that was a huge moment for him. And he turned his life around, and he stopped using drugs, and he got a job. And not to say that the van trip didn't have its ups and downs, but they were his opportunities to learn and figure things out. And he came back and he got a job and he started exercising, and he just turned into this, you know, sun-tanned, fit, you know, picture of health. And it was such a transformation. So yeah, sometimes it's not just about the person, but the people around them, whether that's the drug and alcohol service or the mum or someone else key important in that life, that we've kind of working collaboratively with all the important people.
Mm-hmm.
Brilliant. So if I can follow that up, there's a lovely question from Taylor Jenkin. And you've answered it in part, but it's a good question, picking that up. How can we apply optimism to working with families of children and young people with acquired brain injuries?
Yeah, great question, Taylor. Thanks for coming. The work that we have done in our research is with adults, but the Tim Feeney and Mark Ilvasaka, who are the originators of this approach to PBS, they started working with kids and families. And so I think this approach applies across the lifespan and across diagnoses as well, because it's not a specific therapy, it's an attitude and a framework and a way of working. And so I think, you know, for each person that we work with, even though they're all adults, they're in completely, you know, unique situations. So we've had people who were so impaired that they, you know, were living in supported accommodation and couldn't communicate and in a wheelchair, all the way to people who were, you know, able to complete their masters after their brain injury. So really high functioning and busy mums and people. So I think it applies the same to kids and families as well, is that this approach of being systematic, being collaborative, treating the person as the expert on themselves. And with kids and adults, parents, you know, that expertise is much more shared by the parents' sort of knowledge and understanding of their child, but in that really inclusive approach. And sometimes that's been, and through learning from Tim, even more sort of extreme, I guess, than I've learned previously. So for example, with the guy in the wheelchair that was not able to communicate, previously when we'd have a team meeting, it would be the team meeting in another setting in another room without him there. But with Tim, it was like, well, nothing about me without me. So we don't really know how much this man is understanding. So let's have him in the room. And there was a lot of kickback and pushback on that, you know, that will trigger his behaviours. This will be too confronting. It's too complex for him. And Tim's optimism was like, well, let's just give it a try and see how it goes. And so he was brought into this meeting of, you know, 15 key providers from the house and the therapists in the setting. And he did engage in some behaviours of, hitting at himself, and that can be distressing. But after a few minutes, he sort of settled down. And it was really interesting, the change in the tone in the meeting from having him there in the room. And it sort of changed the attitude of the people that supported him. And they became also a little bit more experimental and trying things out. And that, I think, was this key event that really led to a different way of working and supporting him. And just in a nutshell, it went from him being sort of put in front of a TV and fed his meals to taken out to the park where he could have bite-sized meals himself and feed himself. And then now he's, sitting at the table with the other residents and more engaged. And the staff became really excited about what he could accomplish. And it just sort of kept going from there. So, hopefully that, I guess, speaks to the kind of broader approach with any age group and families as well.
And that notion of have a go, innovation is underpinned by optimism. Some things work, some things don't. Give it a go and be brave enough to say when it does work and when it doesn't. It's a lovely question from Susan McDermott, who's with us. One of the side effects of acquired brain injury is the psychological strength to regain independence. What do you think of the building of a triage based on physio, occupational therapy, psychological support to achieve the stated goals?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely fantastic if you have the ability and the resources to have a team, and that's the way we often work. We kind of, for each person in the community, a new team is created, and it's often familiar faces that form that team. A lot of us work privately or for small organisations, but we form a team, and having physio, occupational therapy, psychological support, often social work or speech therapy as well, and care is often a very common allied health team. And working together is really vital, so that we're all on the same page with, what really matters to that person and how we can work together for that. In the approach that I've been talking about, PBS+, we work. I am a neuropsychologist, but the clinicians are from a variety of backgrounds. So we have occupational therapists and speech therapists and neuropsychologists all working with this approach and bringing to the approach our own specific kind of skill set, but there's so much that's common, and we try to create more expertise in the people with the living experience and their families, so that they become their own therapists and can continue to do this kind of work.
One from Bernadette Cheeseman, damage to the amygdala influences what behaviour? Yeah,
so a great neuroscience kind of question. So, and the amygdala is a part of the brain, and it's involved with our emotions. And it's one section of our temporal lobe, which is kind of this part like over our ear on the side here, if you divide the brain into the key lobes. And it's the limbic system is involved with our emotions. So it also includes the hypothalamus and the hippocampus. So the limbic system's that real hub of emotional processing, and it's connected to other parts of the brain. So the amygdala is typically involved in fear and how we process fear, which is important for survival. We need to feel scared if there's something dangerous. But we also now know that it's involved with forming and storing longer term information, and particularly the emotional resonance of a memory, as well as decision making. So if people have had damage to the amygdala, it can result in a whole range of changes to their function. So they might be more impulsive in their decision making and take more risks because they're not afraid of things going wrong, and take risks in too extreme a ways where that behavior can become dangerous. Because if you're not getting that emotional response and that kind of heart rate going up when we feel a bit nervous or scared, you're not getting those signals to use to guide your behavior. But for some people, it can go the other way, and they might be really fearful of things that aren't dangerous and become sort of a bit paranoid. So that can lead to behavior changes as well. It can also affect your memory. So if you don't have that emotional attachment to things, you might not remember it. So we might remember in particular events from, 20 years ago, if they were emotionally very important, like your wedding day or the birth of your sibling, because there's strong emotions. So that links with our hippocampus that's got the memory for facts. And it's interesting with the clients I work with, sometimes they can have damage to their memory for facts, but not the damage for the memory for the emotion. And so one of my clients, he'll say to me, okay, I had an awful day. I got so angry and I punched a hole in the door. And I'm like, well, what happened? And he's like, I don't remember. I just remember being so angry. And that's where the amygdala is still working, even other parts of their memory isn't. So obviously with, your emotional hub, if there's damage to that, that can also lead to anxiety and depression. And so it can help to understand for people, what's happened to their brain, why it's changed, and why, if they can't rely on that part of the brain to automatically process fear and other emotions, that they can learn different ways to consciously regulate and compensate for their mood and behavior.
Okay, we are so grateful to you. The moment I read about your work, I was inspired by it. And your conversation today, you are an absolute inspiration. And as Eva says, how can we collaborate? We at the Centre for Optimism promise we are going to be great supporters. I know that Eva certainly wants that. So the last question I have to ask on behalf of everyone is, what's next for your programs, Kate, and how can we help?
Well, thank you for those kind words. It's an absolute privilege, and I've loved being able to chat to everyone. And I guess for our work, we're continuing to finalise all the resources we're creating and put them out into the world step by step, and continue to evaluate them. So if people want to stay engaged, as I said, sign up on our website. I think in terms of how to help, though, I think for my area of work, we work with people in their real everyday lives, in their homes, in their community. And all of us here today, we are part of the community. Brain injury is really common. It's 1 in 45 people. So there are lots of people experiencing difficulties that can be often quite invisible. That's another thing about brain injury is we've had several people today speak up who have had experience with brain injury, and you can't tell from just a conversation what difficulties they might be experiencing. So I think wherever you are in the community, in whatever circle you're in, I think it's about patience and giving people the benefit of the doubt, because we don't know what people are experiencing internally, and that benefit of the doubt, I guess, is an optimistic way to think about everyone in the community. And I think that really helps create a better world, and a better world is a huge help to me and the work I'm doing, and the people with challenges that they're experiencing.
Well, Kate Gould, thank you. All strength to your arm. Relentless optimism is the worldwide stereotype of Australians, and you are the perfect image of that positive Australian leader that we all want, admire. Perhaps we need you as Prime Minister or Governor General, as well as your profession.
Not my
On behalf of
aspiration,
everyone,
but
thank you so much. We hope you enjoyed that wonderful conversation with Kate Gould at the Centre for Optimism. We'd love to get you involved with what we do. We cover so many interesting spheres, and few more interesting than this. So the website is Centre for Optimism. You can sign up for our free newsletter, or better still, you can sign up for membership or subscription. We'd love to hear from you anyway, and wish you a great day. And remember, think about that question every now and again. What makes you optimistic?